G'day. It's good to be back with you as we keep moving through the life of Peter and his encounters with Jesus. And this evening, at the end of a week that, it's funny, but this passage just seems to touch so many of our lives in real terms. And we come to this story where Jesus does this weird thing. Just before his arrest and crucifixion, he is at dinner with the disciples and he washes their feet, the act of the most menial of the servants in the house. And the master, the Messiah, the one who is to become Christ, does this for his disciples. So John, and this story does come from John's Gospel, begins with a bit of an introduction. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe and put a towel around himself. Now, he does this just to be sure that we don't see this as some random spontaneous act. John tells us Jesus knows exactly who he is and what's going on. He'd come from God, he's going to God, and he has been given both power and responsibility. Power and responsibility, they're like two sides of a coin. Nothing in the life of Jesus makes sense. It doesn't add up if our expectations is for only one or the other, power or responsibility. You see, if we only want to see Jesus as some eternal lottery, good times giveaway God, we actually rob him of his power to be at work in our lives here and now. And then when we do that, we can disown our own responsibility, the requirement to respond by following the example of the one who has come from God to sit with us at the table and then wrap a towel around himself. This is difficult in a world where perhaps our biggest criticism of leaders, politicians, banks, the church, is that institutions and the people in them wield power without responsibility. You see, careless power brings Peter's response of resentment and confusion. Have I come to expect that my local member of parliament represents her party and not me? Have I come to expect that the bank manager smiles and promises to help and then just faxes everything to a third-party decision maker in Melbourne who doesn't care at all? Have we come to expect that church is a bit like that too? People hear us saying we're here to serve, but they see us ignoring their needs or in some way hoping to manipulate them. So Jesus takes responsibility in his obedience to God. He has a responsibility. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He comes to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You don't know what I'm doing now, but later you will understand." And Peter says to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet, but also my hands and my head." So what happens when God doesn't meet our expectations? Perhaps Peter is saying, God isn't supposed to operate this way. Jesus, you're not allowed to get on your knees and care for your people. Peter's idea of leadership is still about the great hero, who rides in and fixes people's problems. Channel 9's Scott Cam brings in the Block Tradie Blitz team for the complete makeover. A life neatly edited so people watching from the outside think it only takes 30 minutes on a Sunday evening to make everything right. Could be an analogy for church. Jesus doesn't work that way. This carpenter who has come from God brings his own tools and a ragtag team of followers. Peter is not the only klutz in the crew. Please notice that Jesus does this servant foot washing routine with all of them together. And he includes even Judas, who he knows is about to go and betray him. Surely this isn't how God works? Yes, it is. But what about when our expectations of ourselves are not met? Perhaps Peter was saying, Jesus, I don't want or I don't need you to care for me in this way. I'm fine. Fouled up, insecure, neurotic, exhausted, fine. See, Peter's idea of Christ followers community is about keeping our new Nike runners or our Jimmy Choo dress shoes on. No one's going to see my corns and cracked toenails. No way. I mean, what would outsiders think if they saw a bunch of vulnerable, trusting people caring for each other? Surely this isn't how church works. Yes, it is. In fact, in the Old Testament, when Isaiah dreams of Jesus coming from God with the good news of how to live in the life of God, he says, "How beautiful are the feet of the messenger who comes along the mountain path and across the dry creek bed and through the hot sand, bringing the good news. Cracked, bruised, blistered, filthy, beautiful feet." That's where we least expect to meet God at work, but that is where it'll happen. Imagine you've been on your feet all day, working as a hairdresser or whatever. Maybe you're a digger who's lugged a heavy pack all day and you've felt blisters bursting in your boots. You've trained and run a big race, run hard, and your ankles ache. Now imagine walking down to your favourite beach. And you feel that first wave just wash over at the edge of the ocean, cooling your feet in the wet sand. Yeah. See, we get to accept such comfort as that in the love of Christ. Given by God and shared among us, we get to do that for one another. John writes on, "So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." Jesus is both Lord and teacher. He has come into our world as God, and all things have been given into his hands, all our baggage, all our stuff. That's who we follow, one who rolls up his sleeves and gets on his knees and helps to clean up our act. If we expect a life other than his example of the power to be responsible, we will be disappointed, because life won't make sense, especially when it gets hard. Don't sound like Peter when he first says, "You can't help me because I don't deserve it or I don't need it." That's rubbish. Each of us would be amazed if we knew the needs of everyone around us. If we knew what it looked like between the toes of our relationships and under the soles of the feet of our personal journeys. I think we actually do, don't we? I don't think we'd be amazed at all. Jesus says if you know these things, and if we're honest, I think we do know. You are blessed if you do. We are to be servants of the Master who shows us what to do when we come to know that we are all in need. If we know these things and do these things, we can expect our hearts and heads and hands to all get scrubbed. All aspects of our community's life start to look more like the life of God. We are called to roll up our sleeves and get on our knees. To follow the example of the one who has come from God. I hope that's a blessing to you. Look after one another. Trust one another. Care for each other.